6:30 a.m., September 2, 2025, inside U.S. Navy command rooms. Radar screens suddenly lit up with a single signal. A Venezuelan speedboat launching like a bullet across the Caribbean Sea. On board were armed men who believed they were running just another familiar smuggling run, a daring route, carrying contraband and weapons. They had no idea that the freedom of the open sea had already turned into an invisible cage. High above, American satellites were tracking every heat signature, capturing the exhaust plume like a glowing arrow. Thousands of kilometers away, analysts had locked on to every movement of the boat in real time. From the very moment the engines roared to life, every escape route had already vanished. A deadly equation was set. At 25,000 feet, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon silently circled. Its AN APY-10 radar sliced through clouds, scanning every ripple of the waves and every trace of heat. What it saw was more than just a boat. Heat patterns, radio signals, chemical traces from exhaust, all collected and transmitted back to the Navy's combat network. Beneath the sea surface, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, 90 tons of steel, was already in position. The Aegis system linked satellites, ships, and aircraft, turning the tiny boat into prey inside a massive digital net. In military terms, this network is called a kill box. Once a target enters the predefined area, layers of surveillance and firepower overlap to create a deadly geometry that locks every escape. When the order came, there was no warning siren, no dramatic chase, no warning shots. The Poseidon crew confirmed the target. The destroyer's command center locked its fire control radar. Within seconds, a precision strike shattered the composite hull, leaving flaming debris adrift in the ocean. 11 men aboard were killed. Washington immediately declared it a successful counter-narcotics operation, asserting that the boat was directly linked to the notorious Venezuelan criminal network Tren de Aragua. But while the Pentagon hailed a textbook victory, political shockwaves rippled across the continent. Just hours later, President Nicolas Maduro appeared on national television, his fist clenched. "This is murder, an act of war against the Venezuelan people," he thundered. He immediately placed the armed forces on high alert as state media broadcast images of F-16 fighters screaming down cracked runways and troops parading at coastal bases. In a country crippled by sanctions and crisis, the sinking became a spark for nationalism, stoking anti-U.S. sentiment to bolster Maduro's grip on power. Yet behind the fiery rhetoric lay a cold reality. Venezuela's air force was outdated, dependent on scarce spare parts, and its navy was no match for the advanced U.S. destroyers prowling offshore. 3 days after the strike, 2 Venezuelan F-16 fighters suddenly buzzed the destroyer USS Jason Dunham as it patrolled international waters. The sonic boom from their supersonic pass sent the sea surface trembling. The Pentagon condemned the maneuver as reckless and provocative. But for U.S. intelligence, it was a priceless gift. Every radar pulse, every communication frequency of the F-16s was recorded and archived, creating an electronic fingerprint for future scenarios. Washington quickly responded. 10 stealth F-35 Lightning II fighters were deployed to Puerto Rico just 2 hours' flight from Venezuelan airspace. The message was unmistakable. If Caracas wanted a gamble, the United States was ready to raise the stakes. From Colombia to the Antilles, governments across the region watched the rising tension with alarm. Shipping companies rerouted oil tankers to avoid the hotspot. Diplomats warned that a single speedboat sinking had turned the Caribbean into a potential tinderbox, threatening to drag the entire hemisphere into instability. Meanwhile, international law scholars raised a troubling question. If the United States can sink another nation's vessel in international waters merely on suspicion, what stops other powers, China, Russia, from doing the same? Could the oceans become a free fire zone? Inside the Pentagon, the operation was about more than destroying a smuggling craft. The real prize was data. Every radio call, every refueling point, every course change supplied pieces of the Tren de Aragua puzzle. Analysts call it pattern of life intelligence, understanding how smugglers react when tailed, their preferred night routes, their communication methods under pressure. This information enables the next interception to be faster and more precise, not only against Venezuela, but across all transnational crime operations. This was hardly the first time the U.S. Navy turned an encounter into an intelligence opportunity. Chinese helicopters harassing U.S. ships in the South China Sea have inadvertently revealed electronic signatures. Shoulder-fired missile launches by Houthi forces in the Red Sea exposed valuable infrared heat patterns. Russian aircraft skimming NATO ships in the Arctic provided a trove of radio data. Each incident adds to the U.S. data arsenal, and in modern warfare, the side with the most accurate data usually wins. By the end of the first week of September, the Caribbean Sea remained calm, merchant ships continued their routes, but the balance of power had shifted. A small speedboat, once thought untouchable, had dragged both Venezuela and the United States into a dangerous standoff where the weapons were not only missiles, but networks of data, radar, and algorithms. Did the United States truly need to deliver lethal force merely to stop narcotics? Or was this a step beyond the limits, setting dangerous precedents? How would Venezuela respond under both economic pressure and military humiliation? Experts warned that a single misread radar signal, an accidental target lock, or a missile launched by mistake could turn a data-gathering operation into the opening shot of war. Smugglers once believed the ocean offered freedom, but this voyage turned the sea into a digital cage where satellites, surveillance aircraft, and destroyers coordinate in silence. The lesson is chilling. In modern conflict, the side that controls data controls the fight. Whether you view the U.S. strike as justified or reckless, the September 2025 incident proved a stark truth. The Caribbean, once a paradise for smugglers, has become a strategic chessboard where every movement is tracked, every signal logged, and freedom on the waves is nothing but an illusion. Even after the first days of tension, the aftershocks did not subside. Regional security experts warned this could mark the start of a new military buildup in the Caribbean. Colombia, Guyana, and the small island nations of the region were forced to reassess their defense strategies. Some Caribbean states dependent on maritime trade now feared that oil and goods shipments could be disrupted at any moment. International shipping firms quietly raised insurance premiums for routes through the area, wary that a single misunderstanding between the U.S. and Venezuela could ignite armed conflict. Even cruise companies, long promoting the Caribbean as a safe destination, began shifting itineraries, fearing tourists could be caught in a new Cuban Missile Crisis. Inside Venezuela, Maduro seized the moment to tighten his rule. He blamed the U.S. for every economic hardship, rallying the public to unite against a common enemy. Yet, the harsh realities could not be hidden. Spare parts for the F-16 fleet were depleted, leaving most aircraft as little more than symbols. The Venezuelan Navy's few aging frigates were utterly outclassed by U.S. Aegis systems and long-range weapons. The military parades and dramatic drills, though broadcast with fanfare, were hollow shows. Analysts noted that each provocation only helped the U.S. gather more intelligence on Caracas's real capabilities. For Washington, the mission was celebrated as a model of modern warfare. No prolonged battles, no warnings, just data and precision firepower. The U.S. president, in a nationally televised address, emphasized that this was a deterrent message to all transnational cartels. Yet behind the applause, questions of legality smoldered. Does destroying a vessel in international waters based solely on narcotic suspicion violate international law? If other great powers adopt the same reasoning, will the oceans devolve into permanent conflict zones without rules? Human rights groups also spoke out, raising concerns over the right to a fair trial for those killed aboard. Many scholars compared the incident to the drone assassination campaigns in the Middle East, punishment without court process. On the surface, it looked like a counter-smuggling mission, but its deeper essence was a war for data. Every radio ping, every course change, every Venezuelan aircraft takeoff was recorded, analyzed, and fed into the Pentagon's massive intelligence vault. In the age of information warfare, accurate data is ammunition, allowing the U.S. to predict an adversary's moves before they happen. This explains why Washington was never satisfied with merely sinking a single boat. The true target was an information network, what experts call pattern of life intelligence. From now on, every smuggling run would be a solved equation. By late September 2025, the Caribbean Sea still gleamed blue and the waves lapped the shores as always. Yet beneath the surface lay a new chessboard, where the US, Venezuela, and neighboring nations were silently moving their pieces. A small Venezuelan speedboat had ignited a confrontation that could stretch for years, even decades. Was this merely an isolated incident, or the opening move of a Caribbean Cold War where data and high-tech weapons replaced traditional cannons? No one has a certain answer. But one thing is clear: the ocean is no longer a realm of absolute freedom. Every action, whether smuggling, patrolling, or simple transit, is now within the crosshairs of orbital eyes and weapon systems capable of striking in an instant. The Venezuelan boat set out chasing freedom and profit. But in the end, the sea became an invisible prison, a cage woven from satellites, radar, and data traveling at the speed of light. This event is more than the story of a failed smuggling trip. It is a historical marker, signaling a new era of warfare. Not roaring naval battles, but silent strikes. Not drawn-out chases, but precision attacks timed to the second. The Caribbean has changed color. Freedom on the waves, the dream of countless risk-takers, has now become nothing more than an illusion.